So welcome back, and what I'd like for you to do for just a moment is to get in your Wayback Machine and think about the year 2013. Yes, that's 5 years ago, but I want you to think about it. You were building a mid-range AMD build. Okay, maybe you didn't, but maybe you would have, or what have you. So you've put your build together, you're running an FX 8350 and a Radeon HD 7870. So we would call this a mid-range build. So you've held on to it for quite some time, hoping that last year you could have upgraded. And then prices went completely out of control. So you decided to hold on just a little bit longer. And here we are in 2018 and the problem continues. But what about your system? You still got it. Or if you're somebody who's looking to build with extremely cheap parts, well, you can get these parts pretty cheap. So what we're doing today is we're taking a look at this all AMD build. We're running an FX 8350 at stock settings. I know how that sounds. Stock, it's supposed to be overclocked, but we want to get a baseline performance. We are running with the Wraith cooler. So, right there toward the end of its life, you could get it together. As far as a motherboard, we are running the Asus 970 Pro Gaming Aura motherboard. So this was one of the later motherboards to be put out before switching over to the AM4. Memory-wise, we're running 8 gigabytes of extremely rare Radeon RAM, so running at 2133. So it's the maximum that the board supported, but it's only 8 gigabytes, so it's more along the lines of what somebody back then would have built with, as well as somebody building today in a more budget-oriented scenario would build with. So that's what we went with there. As far as the video card, we are running the standard BOG reference Radeon HD 7870 gigahertz edition with 2 gigabytes of GDDR5. I always get hung up on that one. With that out of the way, we want to take a look at how these games run in modern games at 1080p medium settings. We did want to be a little bit more realistic. Ultra is not going to be what this thing's running. So let's take a look at how it runs in 6 more modern titles rather than the older esports titles. Alright, so here we are kicking things off with a last year title. This is Resident Evil 7 running at 1080p medium settings, and we see that we hold pretty close to around 60 FPS. We drop down into the 50s here as we go into some heavier lighting areas, but otherwise it's an excellently playable experience with, well, really no problem. Thankfully it's not a twitchy game, so you don't need it to be super fast. Moving on to Prey, the only real downside that we see here is the 2 gigabyte VRAM buffer. We can see that, and we saw this back with the GTX 1050, was that while the game would run fine, you could see textures wouldn't load properly. You can see right here on this wall, the texture is not fully loaded, but otherwise a pretty good playable experience at 1080p. Shadow of War at 1080p medium settings plays excellently. Yeah, it is staying just under 60 FPS while you're playing, but this is the kind of game that, honestly, if you're over 45 FPS, it's pretty smooth. Again, thankfully it doesn't require super twitchy gameplay. But what about something even newer? How about Final Fantasy 15 at 1080p average settings? We see here that it does struggle a bit, but it stays just above that 30 FPS mark. Now you could do the change it down to low settings, or you could change the resolution scaling and it would run much better. But being the type of game it is, it runs great. PUBG, whew. Yeah, this actually ran better than I thought it would. This is 1080p medium settings, the medium preset at 1080p, and yeah, I mean, it's not the greatest, but we see mid-40s. Come on, is that good? Alright, what about another game? How about Fortnite? Fortnite is running at 1080p medium settings, just like every game that we've played so far, and it is running excellently. Running spectacularly smooth. It's actually one of the better experiences of the bunch. So if you're still running this hardware and Fortnite's on your wanna play list, hey, you're good to go. So there you guys have it. That is kind of the performance to be expected of this. Performance-wise, it ran right about where I expected it to. It does show in some titles where the VRAM does start to become an issue at 2 gigabytes, but again, you could always lower things down even more on texture-heavy settings. So that's something that you can always benefit from. PUBG, very impressed by how well PUBG run. Now, I know some people out there, 40, 45 FPS isn't actually impressive, but for the hardware that it is, again, 5-year-old hardware, running. So, I mean, you get what you get with it. And again, if you're running Fortnite and you want to play Fortnite, which I'm going to do here in just a second, so it runs great on this setup with no problem whatsoever. So, you know, if you're still somebody holding on to your rig because prices are astronomical and you refuse to pay more, or if you're somebody that's looking at older hardware because the newer hardware, I mean, DDR3 is dirt cheap, but DDR4 is not cheap. So, well, of course, that's always based on where you live in the world. So we'd love to hear from you guys. Do so in the comment section down below. And this has been Keith with WCCF Tech TV, and we'll catch you in the next video.